Committee members are present. Go around the room. State your name, please.
Jim DeSorsi.
Joe Terry.
Joe Exton.
Mayor Zach Ruink.
Scott Kellogg.
Paul Shadowski, City Clerk.
Greg Epp.
Tom Rion.
Todd Furkey.
Terry Dolan. Joe Zerflu.
Jeff Kuhn.
Jem Brown.
Item number 2, consider for approval the 2018 Waterworks and Lighting Commission budget.
This is pretty much the Jeff show, but I just wanted to add a couple things. One, on the electric side, we haven't filed for a rate increase since 2014. We think we can sustain that for another year or two. It's probably looking like later in 19 we may have to file for a rate increase, but we've been flat since then, and actually the rates have declined because we've been able to reduce our cost of power supplies. We've actually reduced rates to customers, what, 3.5%?
That was
this
5% last year.
5%
Right.
last year for residential customers, so that's all a good thing. We haven't filed for a full-blown water rate case since 2010. Now, we've had a couple simplified rate cases since then that the PSC allows us to do, which are simple 3% increases. But we may, not this year, there's no increases planned on either side of the budget, electric or water this year, and no additions. But water next year, we may have to file for some type of rate increase at the PSC. It'll be touch and go with as Jeff will get into our rate of returns and where they're at. But with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Did you guys get copies of the budget, or do you need copies?
Digital.
Okay. Did you want a paper copy? I've got a couple here.
Thank you. We got an extra one for somebody needs it.
The budget that you have before you was reviewed and approved by the Waterworks and Lighting Commission on October 23rd. Before we jump into the budget, just wanted to give you a little bit of updates on the utility and a little background information. As a lot of you know, the utility is pretty heavily regulated by the Public Service Commission. One of the requirements is that we follow the uniform system of accounts, and part of that is our activity-based accounting. So our budget is set up for activity-based accounting, so you won't see the salaries line, fringe benefit line, those kind of things. Things are in buckets, so you have like maintenance of services, maintenance of hydrants, customer account expense, and within those, all of those costs get accumulated. Labor, supplies, transportation, all those things get accumulated. That's a PSC requirement. It's all the utilities in the country do it that way. So then you've got better comparison purposes. If you've got one utility, using contractors exclusively and one using their own labor, you've got a good comparison between the two because they're going to the same account that way. Also, when we get into talking about rate of return, just want to remind everybody, rate of return is based on our net utility plant, not necessarily the revenue that's involved. So we take a look at the assets that we have for the utility, and the rate of return is based on those assets. So it's not a percentage of revenue when we're talking that way. Also, the water and electric utilities, when we get into the budgets, are their own separate entities for accounting purposes. Water pays for water, electric pays for electric. If there's common costs, they're allocated appropriately between the funds. A couple touch points with the city's budget, namely water main construction and administrative costs are kind of tied out and reconciled between the two. The water main projects are on page 11 of the budget, the two that we have planned jointly with the city. And there's no new positions requested in the 2018 budget. So what I wanted to do real briefly is just kind of go over a real quick highlight, a couple of the pages in the budget, and then if you've got any questions, feel free to ask Jem or I. The budget's broken into two sections. It's the capital section in front and then the operations and maintenance budget. Page 4 really gives you a high-level summary of our capital additions, both the history and where we expect to be in 2018. So you can see on the top, we've got capital requests of $4,238,500 in total, about $300,000 less than in 2017. While we were in the process of the budget, we had one more water main project in there that got pulled out kind of late, the Chase Street project, which was about $260,000 for the utility side of it. So if that would have been included, we would have been about a $50,000 difference between 2017 and 2018. So pretty comparable budgets. between 2017 and 2018. Pages 5 through 15 just really go in detail our 5-year plan and then details of what our 2018 capital spend is going to be, and gives a little more description of what those projects are. The other page I wanted to point out is on the operation and maintenance side of things. If you look at page 17, we do just a high-level summary of the past 4 years, where we expect the current year to end, and then where we're budgeting 2018 as far as the net operating income and the rate of return. You can see we're estimating 2017 in total to be $1,525,000. Rates of return would be 3.4% for electric and 2% for water. 2018, electric dips down a little bit, water comes up a little bit, but at the end of the day, when you look at them together, it's $1,482,000, so pretty comparable to 2017. However, the rate of return for electric is going down, and water's at about the 2.5%. Just really wanted to quickly walk through the calculations for those rates of return. Is about the only other thing I wanted to show you. On page 20 is the electric rate of return. So again, how we walk through this, you look at the utility finance plant, add in the materials, subtract out the depreciation and the regulatory liability to come up with our average rate base of about $32.9 million. We estimate our operating income to be about $882,000 for the year. You divide the 882 by the 32.9 million to come up with that 2.68% increase. When we're coming up with our operating revenues, we're anticipating zero growth for both the water and the electric utilities, with the exceptions of known additions, expansions, and reductions in the area. So we lost an industrial customer, and then we've got an expansion going on with another industrial customer, and a little bit of commercial happening in 2018. So our rate of return, as you can see, was authorized at 5.75% back when we had these rates set in the end of 2014. To get to that rate would be about a 2.7% increase right now in electric rates. So that's something we're monitoring. That's obviously something we don't want it to get away from us and have a large increase on electric rates. And typically that's what happens as we go through. Every year we're adding additional assets, so that denominator in this calculation is going up, which means you either need additional revenues or a decrease in expenditures to keep that same rate of return. And we're in a case where electricity use is either flat or decreasing a little bit, so that rate of return is dropping a little bit, which is natural. All the utilities are kind of facing that, and then after a couple of years you have to raise your rates to get up to that rate of return that the PSC authorizes. But we can't increase our rates without a PSC rate case, so it's not like even though we're authorized at that 5.75%, we have to go through the full rate case with the PSC to get our rates changed.
When was the last time we had a full rate case?
It was December of 14 was the last full rate case we had, enacted January 15th. And then page 25, again, the same calculation except on the water. Our average rate base is about $23.8 million is what we estimate in 2018. The operating income, just over $600,000, gets us to a rate of return of about 2.52%. Unfortunately, on the water side, you don't have as much revenue, so to get up to a higher rate of return is a higher percentage increase. The last full rate case we had that Jem mentioned in 2010 had a 30% increase, average increase. We obviously don't want to do that again. Right now, the PSC is authorizing rates of return right around 5%, so it'd be a little bit lower. To get to that point with our estimated revenues would be about a 12% increase this year if we would do it, and that's why we'll probably be looking at starting a rate case like Jem mentioned in 2018, probably having something early 2019 going forward. We just don't want that percentage to get away from us and have huge increases for our ratepayers.
And keeping that in mind, our water rates are still very competitive in the area. Out of all our neighboring utilities in the area, we are right in the middle on the lower end. We're number 6 out of about 13. And just for your information, on the electric side statewide, there are 91 utilities, if you count the IOUs, co-ops, and all the munis within the state. And we are number 23 in residential rates out of 91, so we're very competitive.
As far as, I apologize, I'm on the bad side of you guys. As far as rate of return on the water side, obviously it's only 2.5. Are we expecting any large capital improvement projects in the next 5 years that would warrant a rate case increase?
Well, I mean, just the normal operating cost escalation will, but we do have, as Joe's aware, we do have normal distribution projects with the city every year, and we also are going to try to address within the next 5 years to 10 years now, with all the costs that it seems our estimates show, but we're having to address our raw water mains. We'd just like a little more redundancy there as far as getting to the filter plant from our wells. So a lot of our thrust going forward the next 2 years, not next year, but the following year, we'll have money budgeted for that, is to do the raw water mains and do it phase by phase. Probably take 5 to 10 years to finish it all.
Sure.
It's a costly project when you're trying to support it just with water revenue. So, but that would be anticipated with the rate case next year. Unfortunately, PSC typically doesn't allow you a budget for capital expenses. They look at that test year and then you have to deal with it. But like I said, it's been several years since we've had a water rate case. Because of this, we're able to do these simplified water rate cases every other year. Essentially, just a 3% across the board without a detailed PSC audit, which normally is required for any full-blown rate case. But that's probably where, besides the projects we do with the city, that's where our thrust will be on addressing our raw water needs. So,
Thank you.
Joe, can I ask make a comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to augment that too, I think both the city and the utility are a bit challenged in the next couple of years because the utility's got a raw water main project, we'll call it the regular street projects where we've got some water main replacement. We also have the East Grand Avenue project, and that kind of complicates the budget because that's a project that is really in addition to our regular workload. So, that project's cumbersome to manage budgetarily for both the city and the utility, and it's coming up as well too. So, there's a number of projects that financially are challenging for all of us.
Even with the 12% rate case on the water side, if we did increase rates that much, our residential rates probably go from 6th to 7th, or maybe even stay within that 7th compared to what everybody else does. There's really like a $4 or $5 gap between us and the next one, so even like a 10 to 12% increase really wouldn't change our ranking overall on the water side.
any other questions with respect to either the capital expenditures, electric, water, or common, or O&M budget?
You said earlier that the numbers have to include both contractors and actual employees.
So, in activity-based accounting, when you take a look, and we'd have like maintenance of overhead services is probably a good example, or overhead lines, where, we have contractors coming in doing tree trimming for us and those kind of things. Those go in the same bucket, or, maintenance of overhead lines as our our employees doing tree trimming and other activities that happen that way. So, when we look at our comparables to say, how much are you spending on maintenance overhead lines compared to, some sort of denominator, either per customer or per revenue dollar or something like that, you're actually comparing apples to apples across the board. So we do a lot of comparatives analysis with our peers and with utilities across the country, just to see where we stand on those things. So it's nice under the uniform system of accounts that everybody's accounting for it the same way, in theory. So you're looking at the exact same cost. So when you look at our costs in that bucket compared to like Marshfield's costs or Manitowoc's costs, and you divide it either by revenue or employees or customers, you get a true representation of what's involved with that.
And the only full-time contractor that Water and Light has would be Davies, and that's tree trimming. For time to time, we use Vanert or Energis in our substations and stuff, but other than that, those are the only, rest of them are all city employees.
Any other questions?
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the 2018 Waterworks and Lighting Commission budget.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve the 2018 Waterworks and Lighting Commission budget. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's any follow-up or any questions, don't hesitate to give us a call. Thanks.
Sounds good. Agenda item number 3 is review of the 2018 City of Wisconsin Rapids budget.
Well, I think at the last budget meeting, Tommy, you requested kind of going through the Riverbank East Side Bike Path project, and so I guess tonight wasn't the day to get through that project and go and prepare some materials.
It was mentioned that we wanted to have more of an expanded discussion on what, kind of an update on what was done or not done in 2017's budget from what was budgeted at this time last year for this year, and then ultimately what was carried over and then proposed to happen in 2018. And as before we get kind of into details, I'll state that we still have a degree of flexibility as it relates to scope and total project size, because we're going to follow the budget process as we do every year with the borrowing in the spring, with the note issue in the spring, or in the summer. I guess it depends on whenever we're going to go out to the market to borrow. That at that point the council would approve resolutions for the total borrowing, right? So, and that's for probably good reason, because we also have some need for kind of analysis of the scope when we ultimately issue the bid docs. But I think Joe can probably talk a bit further about some of the details as it relates to the project and kind of where we stand to exercise flexibility if the council or we internally suggest that we should do so.
So the handout that you have in front of you, the first portion of it is it's the same information that was provided at a presentation to the Finance Committee in 2016. We did the scoping meeting at that time. And it kind of just outlines the phases of the projects at that time, what we were thinking for implementation, when they might occur, and specifically for phase 1 of the project, which we were hoping to construct actually in 2017 at a cost of estimated at that time around $1.6 million. So that project, just to summarize, since some of you may not have seen this document, is phase 1 runs from the Riverview Expressway along the East River bank of the river, all the way up through the East River Conservancy up to the old Elks building along 2nd Street. And the primary scope at that time was to improve the park features and get a recreational trail connection from the south side of the expressway up to East Grand Avenue corridor. It was split into 3 major components: the Demons Park area on the south side, that was estimated around $780,000, and then there was an on-street trail component along 3rd Street and Mead Street that would tie into the East River Bank Conservancy, and then some internal park improvements in that area. Since that time, we've been working with Supermass and MSA professional services on developing the plans for Phase 1 further. And it brings us to the budget value that was proposed in this year's budget of around $2.5 million. There is a Wisconsin DNR stewardship grant that is a 50% match. And they'll be funding a little over $600,000 of that project. The eligible items for the grant include off-street trail, lighting, new kayak launches, trail components, shelters, restrooms, sport furniture, those sorts of items. Some of the major items that are proposed in this at Phase 1 is the underpass at the Riverview Expressway. That's the trail connection south of the expressway. Get recreational users safely across the expressway. There's also a restroom facility proposed in Demons Park, as well as a shade structure. There's internal page 2 kind of demonstrates that a little bit more clearly. Addition of a paved parking lot, improved kayak launch, of course the trail connections. There's also proposed park lighting.
So you'll see most of the document you have in front of you is completely unchanged from when we originally had discussed it. The actual construction designs have evolved greatly. This is more from a schematic design phase to just illustrate where are the features and what do they look like. So from a design standpoint, the designs are far more complex and more specific than what they are, or more detailed than they are here. The point being is we wanted to talk about what were the cost increases really within the Phase 1. I think Joe had sort of just identified a couple of them, but specific to I think the next page that he's going to talk about is where the rec flat is and where original estimates came in, when we began, and ultimately where they've evolved. And that's where the cost increase, the question of why are we looking at a higher budgetary amount than the 1.6 million that was previously approved at the Finance and Property and Council level about a year ago.
Yeah, so that's a good point. The construction documents, they're about 95% complete, and they can be reviewed at any time if there's some interest in that. But certainly, so some of the other major components, moving up into the East River Bank Conservancy, there's kayak launch, there's some more internal trails, there's the fishing jetties that will also be included in there. The one primary component along the whole shoreline is the riverbank stabilization, and that it's a good example that exhibits some of the cost increases. There's what you could call like a standard riprap that just larger rocks spread along the shoreline. And
Something like you'd see up in Buren's project on South Buren Drive. It's the DNR's traditional haphazard way of stabilizing banks, but it looks 100% different than what the riverbank looks like today, which is a concern we heard from those that live near that area. So we took a look at an alternative to just putting large riprap along the riverbank for stabilization. And maybe you want to talk about that specifically.
So there's three options with the riverbank stabilization that we're looking at with the project. It's a staggered approach from going from the downtown area to further downstream to a less downtown setting. Right in the park area where the fishing jetties are, we'd be looking at more of a flat stone that's tiered down to the waterway, followed by option number 2, which is a standard riprap with a flat stone topping at the top of the bank. And some of those components, they add costs to the project. They're the hand picking of the rocks, the select quarry stone, It's one area where the costs have increased a bit. I think by and large, and all the major components of the project, there was, from when this preliminary plan was put together and when the final design is complete, by and large, a lot of the items were they're underestimated. And the project's evolved slightly in look and feel for different features throughout the corridor. Now, with that said, as the mayor had mentioned, there still remains some flexibility moving towards plan completion and project bidding, that those major components, the restroom facility, the riverbank stabilization to some degree, lighting of the parks, and then even doing a concrete trail versus an asphalt trail, providing alternative bid items in the bidding documents so that there remains some flexibility and some decision making when the bids come back, so the council has some leeway there on if it matches the proposed budget or not, and versus moving forward with the project or having to take a step back and revisit some things.
And I think a dynamic of, we don't have any clue at this point how competitive the bid docs or the bids may come back in once we go to publish the construction docs. And I think, our hope is that there will be at least, one bidder on it, that, there might be some cost reduction from the overall estimates and ultimately where the bids come in. And the bid alternates would give us that flexibility to say yes on a restroom or no on a restroom, and yes on some of the other features, particularly now that the costs have come in a lot higher than they were previously estimated, as Joe just talked about. So I think, at this stage, generally the scope remains the same. At a bare minimum, the project is pretty straightforward if we want to just go forward at some point with just the trail and just the basic features, but it's just a basic project at that point. I mean, it doesn't have any of the aesthetic appeal or the visual features like lighting or some of the other pieces that people have asked about. So I think at some point, we're going to have to decide, do we want to go forward with a project that actually has some appeal, or something that's about as basic as it's going to get with just a recreational trail. Ultimately, when the bids come back and the construction documents or estimates are validated or whatever that might be. So the phase one remains as phase one. It's just between the extensive amount of time that it's taken us to get through all these discussions with MSA, who's doing the design. The river modeling took months this summer. For a whole host of reasons, the project, there was no way we were going to get it let this year, based upon getting DNR permitting that we've found has taken us this amount of time. We haven't even gotten our permits back from them on what we're proposing to build, and we hope to get that sometime by December for us to get the project let so we can get some estimates back. But I think the complexities of the project, it's been time well spent. I think all in all, if we wanted to just put shovels in the ground and just move on, we would have been dealing with a lot more troubles, I think, than what it was worth in hindsight. But there's also the utility conflicts along the corridor and going underground with all the utilities. There's a fair amount of overhead now, and working with Water and Light on those, as well as what Solaris and We Energies, the rest of the utilities on the project. So, I think the moral of the story is the project is about a year behind from what we were hoping to be at this stage, based upon the fact that we budgeted for the phase one last year. There's no way we're going to construct it all in this year, right? It's already November. And given the schedule, it's also pressed into what we would have been expecting to put out, and that's phase two. So I think it's, it happened to be that phase one just didn't get underway, and we're looking at wanting to get phase two underway. We've got the 600 and some thousand DNR match that we'd like to apply to phase two and get those construction documents underway, get some estimates and project costs going for that, given the way how the real estimates have come forward on the first phase. So I guess that would be just kind of my comments. I'm going to look at my notes to see if there's anything else. On the financing on phase two, we've had some discussion related to the Triangle project. There's an opportunity, all of the downtown, any of the improvements in the city could be financed through alternative means than just direct borrowing. And one would be issuing or creating another TID or downtown or another TIF district to finance those improvements. So the thought would be, if we achieve a point with Gorman or with the developer on the Triangle project, could the increment that's being generated at that site pay back or pay for the improvements in phase 2. So we're looking at that as an alternative or a possibility right now. And I think that would sync up nicely with the schedule that we're planning to borrow next year anyway, at some point in late winter or spring. We'll have a better idea how things are progressing with that real estate developer to know if there's a possibility to create a site-specific TID later on to finance phase 2. So I guess that would be just another thing I want to add to the consideration that, between bid alternates, the alternative financing mechanism with the TID, a grant that we did write, or we did solicit for a local foundation to support aspects of the project, which we haven't heard back on some of those things to know kind of where the city's costs might come in. We did borrow some already earlier this year, which Tim would reflect and identify maybe in his email that he had sent out on the 27th of October that talked about the carryover funds. So I think that's I guess my comments that I would make.
So did I hear you, maybe didn't hear you say, but you mentioned the bid process. Do you think we can get bid process going by January then?
What's DNR permit dependent, I think, is the
You gotta have
uncontrollable
that
item.
right for the bid process.
Yeah. We could issue bid docs without that, but I think it'd be
Yeah,
unknown
it's
for the
gonna add
contractor.
cost,
Yeah. So I think we're thinking in December that we
Yeah,
could issue
hopefully
phase
December.
1,
Okay.
and then there's no reason that some of the work couldn't begin even in the winter, throughout the winter, in 2018. So the coming winter, the coming calendar year. At least that's the MSA schedule they've given us the last 2 weeks when we've had calls. And we've been meeting probably every second or third week with them to go over various aspects of it. I'll tell you, when we sent them on the goose chase to re-look at the river wall and how we would change from riprap to maybe stack stone and go doing a quarry visit with some local people that were really concerned about it, trying to find some colored stone that matches the look and the feel, not kind of a granite red look, but kind of a dark blue. And there's just, we've been sent on so many detailed excursions on this thing that it's taken us a lot longer than we anticipated. But I do think it was time well spent. In hindsight, I'm hopeful we'll get some grant dollars from a local source that has now been brought along in the process, had their concerns reflected in the designs, but it's all at the expense of timing and when we actually get shovels in the ground too.
Personally, I would like to not see it cheapened up. This is something that's going to be in our community for a long, long time. I mean, what we have now has been, right?
Right.
So
And it's been enjoyed.
So
by
don't skip the
residents.
bathrooms is my message.
Well, we gotta also remember that there's an initial cost and there's gonna be continuing maintenance costs too. So something like this, and I'm just playing the devil's advocate, by no means am I suggesting that this is a bad idea, but we gotta be cognizant on the fact that by adding improvements, we're gonna have to continue to maintain those improvements. Well,
You're going to bring more people downtown too.
And in some ways, we haven't been able to maintain some of the amenities that are there today too, right? I mean, the reality is the river wall is deteriorated, not because we didn't maintain it, maybe we couldn't or didn't know how, or any variety of things that, and plus there's a life expectancy of those improvements too. The fact that river wall is 100 years old and withstands a year of annual flooding and events that really challenge the integrity of the structure, that at some point it's an obligation of the city to do it and fix it anyway. And I think if we can add improvements to that, but I think you raise a good point. We've had some discussion with staff. How do we reprioritize or even add staff in a certain area that might be more seasonally focused to maintain some improvements?
Yeah, to that point, I know we talked about, but like Demet's Park, we're raising that up, right? As part of this project. I mean, we're worried about, we heard the concerns about flooding and.
There are portions of it that are being raised up, but by and large, the park primarily sits in, well, I should say by and large, part of the park sits in the floodplain. But there are some of the, I guess Superman's referred to them as rooms that are kind of created that are grading that's occurring that gets you back up to 3rd Street. There's a few areas that are being filled in there, provided to fill.
I've crossed that intersection coming over the bridge. Boy, an underpass on that side of the river would be nice, but
Yeah, we need a restroom.
I mean, just
That's what he was talking about.
address, I guess what for me is the elephant in the room, and I know we're hoping to get, donations and things like that, but is this project gonna compete, in your opinion, I guess, with the Aquatic Center, trying to get that up and running at all?
From a,
Or don't we anticipate that from a financial standpoint?
well, yeah, I mean, obviously for all those projects, I mean, the budget you have basically, different components of a $6.2 million bond issue, of which one is the complete phase 1 and phase 2 of the East River Bank. And then obviously you have in that bond issue, you have the $2.5 million, which is the other half of our $5 million commitment towards that regional facility, plus our Public Works Construction Fund, And one thing I'll be sending out is really looking at, okay, now you borrow this money, obviously at some point you have to budget to pay the principal and interest on those bonds and what that does to your tax rate. And obviously I'm working on and I'll be distributing a long-term debt projection, which kind of factors in this, plus some other projects that we'll have down the road. So you can see the impact that it'll have, on the budget and, residents.
I think a couple things to consider with this project is that the grant was applied for and approved. The council's committed to the project. The city's committed to the project. As staff, we've tried to review. Some of the project's fairly bold, and in the process of reviewing the plan documents and the projected costs, we've really tried to evaluate what we can afford to do and still maintain the character of the project, and what components can be considered future components, so that if we can't do the whole project, it does act as a master plan. There are potentially some other areas that, some of the lighting, we could potentially work with our own utility on some of those aspects. Some of the things that are going to be bid is an option in this first phase is going to be with the riprap installation. We're looking at the possibility of having our city staff do that installation to potentially save on some costs. We want to review what those bid numbers are to see if indeed there would be a cost savings, but we're trying to do everything that we can to satisfy the city's commitment in this project and maintain its character. But like I said, to have certain areas held out, that we can always review in the future, and continuous funds are available.
And some of the line outs, there are things I'm like, oh, that got scrapped, but so as long as we can keep our options open.
I think the bid alternates, when we look at actually publishing the bid docs, to just press on what are those areas that we want to consider core items, what are the bare bones things we want, and then what are those additional items that we can either accomplish later or find another donor for. But I think, it's the community created in some form or another the opinions are represented or reflected in the long-range plan, and I think the community at some level wants us to get started on it, and we all want to get started on it dearly, right? We've been invested at least 3 years in meetings and designs, and just a lot of effort has been put into it. Just getting it underway is going to be a success in and of itself. So I think, there's a lot in there, and I think the more, as time goes on especially with some of the downtown investments, if we do create a site-specific TID to capture some increment for future development, if things plan out the way come to be the way that we're planning them to be, I think there will be some funding sources to accomplish, as opposed to just borrowing and realizing or tapping the taxpayers for the project or financing their improvements. You did attend your Public Works Conference in Wausau, and in your notes you identified, they walked through their experience. Maybe you just want to highlight a couple of the Wausau riverfront stuff.
So the Wausau riverfront project is a pretty grand scale project, and unfortunately, because of the timing of the conference and the amount of time and sessions, we didn't get a chance to go down there and visit it. But if you haven't seen it, I've seen pictures of it. It was a massive undertaking, close to $14 million. They spent 2 years meeting for, I think it was every other week for 2 years, with their staff, with residents, and they had millions of dollars in local contributions. It was partly a brownfield redevelopment, but part of it was themed. They have kind of an Adirondack seating area. It's just kind of a cultural area where people can come and visit, and they have different athletic areas. They have a dock so that boats can come up, tie off. They've converted what was a large storm sewer area, 96-inch pipe, into an open channel. And to accommodate the vehicle traffic and the pedestrian traffic, they have a bridge for each. The bridges are also very aesthetically pleasing. The traffic bridge actually has pumps and 3 discharges, so there's 3 waterfalls that actually come off the bridge. It's LED lit. It looks like it would be just amazing to see. And then the pedestrian facility also is the architecture is fairly unique. It's lit. Their objective was to create a destination that when the public goes by, they stop and pause. And clearly that's evident. There's a price tag that comes with it. I posed the question directly: how do you anticipate maintaining this project? In that particular location, they also have some adjacent property that is being and will be leased for different residential multi-use type building projects, and they anticipate that the lease income is going to help provide the maintenance income to maintain these facilities. They literally need extra staff, because of the breadth of the improvement. I do intend to go back up there in the spring and take a look at it, but from everything that was shown in the presentation, it's certainly a large-scale project, a little larger than what we're anticipating, but it clearly is a destination piece for their community, and a real highlight. They suffer some of the same concerns from their industries that we do, acquiring talent, things like that. They feel they need quality of life features to attract talent and keep talent, and again, some of that downtown type housing, these types of facilities are what they have concluded is going to help them, and it is not that different than what the city of Wisconsin Rapids is proposing. So that it was encouraging, and I guess confidence inspiring to see some of the same thoughts and efforts going into a riverfront revitalization project.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, are there any constraints on the stewardship grants that we got? For example, I imagine that the whole scope of the project was highlighted or detailed in the application process or in the application documents. In my understanding, I'm not an expert on it, but my understanding is that the DNR gives certain grades or points for certain aspects of the actual project. For example, at least in years past, biking, jogging, and walking paths have scored highest on their awards. So if it's a case where we scale back a project and we remove jogging, walking, biking paths, will we have to reapply or show, or on the flip side of that, if we are penalized somehow for that, maybe focus the project on those specific high priority activities that people use or want to use in their green space areas?
So there are ineligible and eligible expenses within the various features, and I think Joe has worked with the DNR folks to understand what, and that's ultimately what gave us the 600, the numbers that the DNR awarded us were based upon what was eligible. So I think it's safe that our project costs have come in higher than what we originally gave them for project estimates, because it's, we're going to utilize all of those DNR resources without jeopardizing, I believe, without jeopardizing any having to cut back on or return any funds to them. I mean, our cost estimates are now higher than what we originally submitted. So, but that's a good point. And I think that you bring up stewardship, and I'd like to just throw it on the table that I think we've been successful 2 years now why not apply for a third year of allocation? It's my understanding the last 2 years we've received allocation, collectively now 1.2 or 1.3 million dollars, that they were the single largest allocations around the state. So I think there's a bit of, especially if we get shovels in the ground and get the project underway, there's going to be an interest, I think, to see this through in a larger phase than just kind of creating a trail. But I may be reading too much into the DNR's thinking, but I do think that's due in May again, and we could apply some of the phase 2 stuff that we don't have our match or our project cost raise. I mean, the less of the 50% that we have to cover out of our own pocket and use state resources, I think we should. That's all I've got for comments. If there's other questions of us, Jim Lawrence.
No, just if there was any other questions related to phase 2 at all.
I guess it's just a quick, I'm sorry, make sure, and just in, but I guess to complement what I just kind of talked about, if it's a case where, and if it's a case to justify, obviously, it's hard because I don't think that I've ever thought of myself as being a fiscally conservative type of person, but the more that I've been on the council, I have it. It's a case where if we turn down or give back DNR stewardship monies, we fail, we'll actually get penalized for that, and we'll probably not necessarily be able to, we could apply in the future, but they might turn us down for other aspects. On the other hand, with some of these, I don't know, details that would be non-eligible type expenses with DNR stewardship, I think one justifiable aspect or argument that we could have is that we move forward with what is eligible with the bike trail and whatever else, and then still have these pictures or portraits or whatever that once people start driving and navigating and going down and visiting that, people say, well, how come we don't do this and how come we don't do that? Hey, we've got a master plan. You know what? Let's now find the fundraising or talk to your friends that volunteer and or work at the various foundations. And let's make it happen. So I mean, I don't think that by scaling back, we would literally be scaling back per se, as long as we can still have some value added. But sometimes you got to have that give and take.
You can be confident that the eligible items on this project remain, and there'll be full use of those grant funds to accomplish those tasks. There's no question that the focus has been on those eligible items. Some of the things that Joe had mentioned, like the fishing jetties, the DNR just is not going to allow that. And so there's a few things that we've had to modify. Some of the trail system in the park that you're looking at on that page, we've got to streamline that a little bit. It won't be quite as robust, but everything that's eligible, we will be fully utilizing those grant dollars on those components. So there won't be any grant funds that'll go back to the state, and we will be through the construction of this project, we'll be satisfying the components of the project that were in that grant application. So I don't think there's any reason to be worried about that.
I guess I would make sure that we keep a large emphasis on lighting of that walking or biking trail, because I think that's when the utilization of that will be very pronounced. Certainly just the drive-by aspect at night, even if you're not walking or biking, to see it there really does enhance the riverfront.
Well, and that's one of those major bid alternates that I think consciously are going to have to say, do we want to create a visual effect in something that's more of a destination that has an appeal beyond daylight hours? I mean, just for an indication, just in phase 1, so primarily Demetz Park, lighting is about a $350,000 component. So you know, it's a good, in my opinion, it's a worthwhile investment. It's a matter of what does it compete against? But I appreciate you mentioning lighting, because it's one of those things that some might just say pass off and don't light it. Well, as one that uses the West Riverbank Trail when it's dark out, and if you're not lit, you're running into walkers, bikers, joggers, dogs. I mean, it's not necessarily the safest place to be at night. So it's a good investment, I think. You know, once you're there, it's a lot easier to do it when you're there doing the project than coming back saying we'll do lighting later. I mean, let's be realistic. It's going to be a lot tougher for us to do lighting after it's been done, the project's been finished. So appreciate you mentioning that, 'cause that's one that we've talked quite a bit about internally. Is, you know, it's a steep investment, but I think it'll be worth it if we do the right areas, especially.
Okay. So we will move to agenda item number 4, set next meeting date.
Is there anything else?
We have a regularly scheduled one next week on the 14th, it'll be set earlier, so we
We're good till next.
Okay, so we'll skip that. And
Yeah, and what we'll do is we'll have a regular schedule, and then we'll have basically final approval of the budget from the finance committee, and then we have the public hearing on the 21st, our normal scheduled council meeting.
it is at 5 next week.
Correct.
I know we changed it up and it confused me and Greg, so.
Pretty much 4:30.
I thought we did 5 next
Next
week.
week, 5? I
Yeah.
can't remember what.
I think we lobbied that you would do it.
I think you did.
Yeah.
I got overruled. Okay, well then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Motion is second to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, Joe. Joe?